The moon hung low and swollen, bathed in a sinister crimson hue as it cast its ghostly light over the stagnant waters of the Louisiana swamp. The cypress trees, ancient and knotted with hanging moss, whispered secrets in the wind. Beneath their canopy, the land seemed to breathe, slow, heavy, and burdened with memory. There were places in these woods that never forgot, and the Dubois estate was one of them. The plantation house loomed in the distance, half consumed by the encroaching wilderness. Its white columns were stained grey, its windows like eyes long closed to sunlight. Some said it was cursed, others claimed it was simply forgotten. But those who lived nearby knew better. They kept their distance, especially on nights like this, because on nights like this the swamp spoke, and it always spoke of blood. Elijah Dubois pressed his forehead to the cool glass of his bedroom window, staring into the darkness beyond the tree line. He had heard it again, a voice, soft, distant, oft. It called his name not like a whisper, but like a memory, familiar, persistent, and utterly impossible. He turned away, trying to dismiss it. 17 years old, almost 18, too old for ghost stories, too old to be frightened by the wind. But deep down, Elijah knew something was wrong. He had always felt it. Since he was a child, there had been an unease in the house, a feeling like someone was always just out of sight, watching. His Aunt Celeste blamed it on the old wood and the swampy air. "The house groans like an old man," she would say with a weary smile. But Elijah wasn't convinced, especially not after tonight. Before we dive deeper into this haunting tale, don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying stories from the shadows of history. Your next nightmare might just be waiting in the next video. Elijah turned from the window and sat on the edge of his bed, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Tomorrow would mark exactly 1 week until his 18th birthday. It should have felt like a milestone, something to look forward to, but it felt like a countdown. He had begun to dream strange dreams, flashes of faces he didn't recognize, names he'd never heard, and places he'd never seen, all wrapped in fog and flame. He'd told Celeste, hoping for reassurance. But instead she'd grown quiet, her eyes flickering with something like fear before she changed the subject. That silence unsettled him more than any nightmare. The door creaked open, and Celeste entered with a flickering oil lamp in hand. Her graying hair was tied back, her eyes heavy with worry. "You're awake," she said softly. "I heard it again," Elijah replied. "The voice." She hesitated, then set the lamp on his desk. "The swamp plays tricks, child, especially when the moon bleeds. You need rest." "But it said my name." Celeste's lips pressed into a tight line. "Then don't listen." Elijah watched her carefully. "You've heard it too." She didn't answer. Instead, she moved to close the window shutters and latched them tight. "There are things out there that remember," she whispered. "Best you not let them in." As she turned to leave, Elijah stood. "Aunt Celeste, please. What's happening to me?" She stopped in the doorway. For a moment she looked impossibly old, as though the years had suddenly weighed her down. "You're almost a man now," she said, "and the Dubois blood runs deep, deeper than most know. You'll learn in time." Then she closed the door behind her, leaving Elijah alone with the flickering lamp and the slow, rhythmic sound of the wind brushing against the window. Later that night, unable to sleep, he lit the lamp again and wandered the house. The halls were silent save for the low moan of the wood beneath his feet. The portraits of his ancestors watched him from the walls, their painted eyes cold and unblinking. He stopped before one, a stern man with piercing eyes and a silver-handled cane. "Lucien Dubois, 1790, it read. Elijah traced the name with his fingers. There was something about Lucien's gaze that unsettled him, as though the painting itself disapproved of his presence. The longer he stared, the louder the wind howled outside, until it almost sounded like voices, chanting, murmuring in French, in tones not meant for the living. He turned and walked away quickly, heart pounding, only to stop at the sound of a whisper behind him. "Elijah." The lamp sputtered. He spun around. Nothing. But the air had changed, thicker, colder. And in that moment, Elijah knew the voice was real, Something had spoken, and whatever it was, it knew his name. The next morning brought no comfort. The sun rose behind thick clouds, casting a pale, cold light over the Dubois estate. Elijah wandered through the creaking hallways of the house, his skin crawling with the memory of the voice. The echo of it lingered not just in his ears, but somewhere deeper, beneath the skin, in the blood. The plantation never truly slept. It shifted and groaned at odd hours, sighing like an old beast exhaling its last breath. The staff had long abandoned the property, and only Elijah and Aunt Celeste remained. Meals were silent, rooms were shut, and above all, no one ever entered the east wing. It was the forbidden part of the house. Doors locked, curtains drawn. Celeste had never spoken of it directly, only warned him as a child that some rooms are best left to the dead. He used to think it was to protect him. Now he wasn't sure. That afternoon, he stood before the east wing's double doors. The heavy wood was cracked and warped with age, the handles dull with rust. He reached out, half expecting it to burn him. It didn't. It was cold. Too cold. But locked, as always. From behind the door came a faint sound, something between a sigh and a hum. It sent a chill racing down his spine. He stepped back quickly and turned down another corridor, trying to shake the feeling that the house was breathing in time with him. The hallway led to the old study, a place he rarely visited. Most of the books had rotted or been eaten away by time, but something drew him there now, as if the house were guiding his steps. On the desk sat a wooden box he hadn't seen before. Dustless, new, yet covered in old carvings, symbols he didn't recognize. He lifted the latch, and the lid creaked open. Inside were letters tied with black ribbon, a faded journal, and something that looked like a dried flower, brown and brittle with age. He picked up the journal. The leather cover bore a single initial burned into it. L. He opened to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, looping, precise. The ink had bled in places, but the name was still legible, Lucien Dubois, 1811. Elijah felt his stomach turn. Lucien, the man in the portrait, the man whose eyes had followed him down the hall. He glanced at the doorway, half expecting someone to be standing there. No one. Only the creaking of the floorboards beneath his feet. He read the first few entries. They were ordinary at first, accounts of plantation operations, crop yields, trade, but they quickly turned darker. Mentions of a sickness in the family, whispers in the night. Lucien spoke of dreams, visions that bled into waking life. He referenced rituals, foreign languages, a desperate search for a way to bind what cannot die. Elijah slammed the book shut. His hands trembled. Whatever this was, it wasn't the ramblings of a madman. It was too focused, too deliberate. He turned to the letters. Most were written in French, addressed to someone named Marie. The tone shifted between love and sorrow, hope and horror. In one, Lucien wrote, "The child bears the mark. The voice speaks through her now. I fear I've opened what should have stayed sealed." The last letter ended abruptly. The ink smeared as if written in haste. The flower lay at the bottom of the box, crumbling at the edges. When Elijah touched it, he felt something sharp. A pin hidden beneath. Attached was a torn scrap of fabric, embroidered with the Dubois crest and stained a deep rust color. He dropped it quickly. His finger bled. The clock struck 5. The chimes echoed through the house like a funeral bell. He left the study and made his way back upstairs, but as he reached the landing, he froze. A soft, delicate sound floated through the air, humming, a lullaby, in French. He turned toward the east wing. The melody was distant, muffled by walls, but unmistakable, childlike, haunting, familiar, even though he had never heard it before. Each note stirred something in him, like a memory buried deep in bone. He stepped closer to the locked doors. The humming stopped. Elijah. The voice again. Whispered, gentle. His heart thundered in his chest. He backed away, nearly tripping on the stair. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get out, to wake up from whatever this was. But he didn't run. He stood there, staring at the door. And for the first time he wasn't sure who was truly locked inside, the ghost or himself. The journal never left Elijah's side after that. He carried it tucked beneath his coat, hidden like a secret sin. Each night after Celeste had retired and the house descended into its restless moans, he'd open it by lamplight, devouring every word like a man starved for answers. The entries grew more disturbing with each passing page. Lucien had not been simply a man of means, he had been obsessed. The sickness that plagued his family, according to him, was not of the body but of the spirit. He spoke of visions, a shadowed inheritance that manifested in his children. There was talk of a daughter who spoke in tongues and drew symbols in ash, a son who sleepwalked into the swamp and never returned, dreams of fire, bones buried beneath the house. Always he circled back to the same phrase, "The blood must be paid." The phrase chilled Elijah each time he read it. At first he assumed Lucien had lost his mind, driven mad by grief or isolation. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. He began to search the house for clues, starting with the attic where old family records had been abandoned in trunks and crumbling cabinets. Dust rose in clouds as he opened one after another, revealing yellowed birth certificates, ledgers, and portraits forgotten by time. He laid out a crude family tree on the attic floor, organizing names and dates into generations. His fingers trembled as the pattern emerged. Every generation of Dubois had multiple children, yet always, without exception, one died before reaching adulthood. And always at 18. He read the obituaries brief and cryptic: drowned in the river, taken by fever, vanished in the woods. But the timing was too precise to be coincidence. No one else in the family had ever lived past that cursed birthday, unless a sibling had died first. Then came the one that broke him, Mathilde Dubois, 1849, deceased, age 18, survived by twin sister, Celeste. His breath caught. Aunt Celeste had a sister, a twin, and she had never spoken of her. He read the death report again, heart pounding. Cause: sudden illness, witnesses note screaming and firelight prior to collapse. He climbed down from the attic, the journal clutched in his hands, and stumbled into the parlor where Celeste sat embroidering by the fire. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, breathless. "About Mathilde?" Celeste didn't look up. Her needle paused in mid-air. "She was my other half," she said softly, "and she died because I lived." Elijah felt the room shift. "You knew?" "I've always known," she replied, eyes distant. "We are not like other families, Elijah. We never were." He knelt beside her. "Then tell me the truth." "All of it." She stared into the flames. "Lucien made a promise, a pact. I don't know with what or how, but he opened a door that should have stayed closed. Since then, every generation has paid the price." "A price of blood," Elijah whispered. She nodded. "And the curse never skips a generation." Elijah rose to his feet, heart racing. "Then I'm next." Celeste stood slowly, her hand brushing his shoulder. "Your dreams, they've started?" "Yes." "And the voice?" He hesitated, then nodded. She closed her eyes. "Then the mark is on you." "What mark?" "Not one you can see," she said, "but it's there, in the blood." He looked down at his hands, suddenly unsure of his own body. "How do we stop it?" Her silence was answer enough. That night, Elijah returned to his room and opened the journal once more. The final entries were fragmented. Lucien's handwriting grew erratic, desperate. He mentioned a ritual, something incomplete. "The offering must be chosen, not taken," he wrote. "Willingness grants passage. Resistance breeds wrath." Elijah didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, listening. The walls groaned louder now, as if the house itself were waking up. He lit a candle and approached the mirror above the dresser. For a moment, it reflected only darkness. Then his face appeared, older, hollow-eyed. But behind him, in the shadows, stood a girl, dressed in white, mouth open, humming. He spun around, nothing, but his candle flickered violently. The air smelled of burnt flowers. His reflection still lingered in the glass, staring back at him. But the girl was gone, and in the quiet, he finally understood what Louisiana had meant. The curse was not a punishment. It was a promise, and it had come to collect. By the third morning, Elijah could no longer bear the weight of silence. The air in the house had thickened, like fog turned to syrup. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. The journal now felt like a living thing, its pages breathing under his fingers. The same phrase repeated in his thoughts over and over: the blood must be paid. But if there was a debt, then someone had to know how to break it. There was one place left to turn. Just beyond the far edge of the property, where the cypress trees grew so tightly together that even sunlight hesitated, there lived a woman known only by whispers, Mambo Eulalie. The locals called her the Swamp Witch, though never to her face. Some claimed she was 100 years old, others that she'd been born dead and taught the old magic by the spirits that raised her. Elijah had heard her name only once before, in a conversation Celeste had abruptly ended. He left the house before dawn, walking the deer path past the drying fields and into the swamp. The water lapped quietly at his boots, thick with algae and decay. Every few steps he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting the trees themselves to reach out and pull him under. After nearly 2 hours, the trees parted to reveal a clearing. In the center stood a crooked hut raised on stilts, covered in feathers, bones, and hand-carved charms. Smoke drifted from a rusted chimney. It smelled of sage and something older, like burnt sugar and blood. He hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. "Child of Dubois," a voice croaked from within. "Have you waited too long?" The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the hut was crowded with trinkets, jars of things that moved, and 1,000 candles burning without smoke. At the center, seated on a cushion of snakeskins, was Eulalie. She wore layers of cloth stitched with shells and dried herbs. Her skin was lined like tree bark, her eyes milky and pale, but not blind. They saw straight through him. "You knew I was coming," Elijah said. "I knew someone would. The bloodline is fraying. The tether weakens." She gestured for him to sit. "And you are the last strand." He sat cautiously, the journal on his lap. "You know about the curse?" She chuckled, a sound like leaves rustling in bone-dry wind. "Curse? No, child, this is not a curse." "It is a covenant." Elijah swallowed hard. "What kind of covenant?" "One of desperation," she said. "Lucian came to the swamp long ago. He had wealth, land, but what he wanted was power, and he offered the only thing that cannot be stolen, his blood." "To who?" "La Griffe," she whispered. "The claw, an old thing, older than names. It slumbers beneath the roots, where the bones of the drowned rest. Lucian gave it a vessel, and in return his family prospered." Elijah felt sick. "So he sacrificed his children. Not all. 1 child per generation, an offering, willingly or not. That's murder. That's survival," she said. "And now it is your turn." He shook his head. "There has to be a way to stop it." Eulalie leaned forward. "The pact binds only the blood. But blood has 2 sides, one to give, one to break. It must be undone by a Dubois who sees the truth and still chooses." "Chooses what?" "To bleed for freedom," she said. Elijah looked down at his hands. "And if I don't?" "The cycle continues. You die. Another takes your place, or worse, the offering fails and La Griffe comes to collect in full." A silence settled between them. Finally, Elijah opened the journal. Louisiana wrote about rituals, something incomplete. "He feared what he created," Eulalie said. "He tried to reverse it. But fear makes a poor sacrifice. The bond rejected him. And so, the curse endured." Elijah's thoughts raced. "Then I can finish what he started?" Eulalie gave a slow, knowing nod. "You must find the first wound. The place where the pact was made, and you must spill the blood freely, no resistance, no lies, only then will the demon listen." He rose to his feet. "Where is this place?" Eulalie pointed north. "Where the water doesn't ripple. Where the trees are still, you will know it when it finds you. He turned to leave, heart pounding. As he reached the door, she called out, "You carry more than your own soul, Elijah Dubois. Be sure you know whose blood you're offering before you bleed." The Dubois house welcomed Elijah back like a beast sensing its prey. The air was thicker now, the silence more oppressive. Even the light seemed to dim near the walls. He passed Celeste in the hallway, her gaze shadowed with something between sorrow and resignation. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. Elijah locked himself in the study, laying out the contents of the journal, letters, and family documents once more. He needed to understand everything, every thread that wove this tapestry of death and legacy. The truth had to be in the records, in the blood. He began cross-referencing names with birth records and noticed something that stopped his breath. In every generation, there were always 2 children born. Never 1, never 3, always 2, twins, but only 1 ever lived past 18. He flipped through letters, notes scribbled in margins, records of childbirth. 2 entered the world, one midwife wrote in 1824, but 1 left it screaming. They were all born in pairs, and 1 always died before reaching full adulthood, sacrificed, offered, or simply taken. The other lived on, carrying the memory, the guilt, the mark. Elijah stared at the old Dubois crest embossed in red on each parchment. He began to see it not as a symbol of nobility, but as a seal of doom. The further back he looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Some of the surviving twins had gone mad. Others had disappeared into the woods, never to return. And always, the firstborn died at 18. It was as if the curse had a schedule, written in veins instead of ink. He turned to Lucien's entries again, focusing on the year 1812. Marie showed signs before the moon changed, her shadow longer than her body. The mirror refused her face. I sealed her in the east wing before she could speak his name aloud. Marie, the daughter. Elijah felt his stomach turn. Her room, still locked. Her lullaby, the one he heard. He remembered the words from the journal. The child bears the mark. The voice speaks through her now. Lucienne had tried to contain the curse, but she wasn't the first. She was just the first to survive long enough to speak. He searched through the attic again, this time pushing further into the darkest corners, where light had not touched in decades. There, behind a trunk of rotted linens, he found a hidden crate. Inside, beneath layers of faded cloth, was a rolled canvas, massive, cracked with age. Unfurling it on the floor, Elijah stared into the painted eyes of 6 generations of Dubois twins. All posed side by side, one vibrant, one pale, one living, one fading. There was no mistaking the pattern. And at the bottom, scrawled in the same looping script as the journal, one to thrive, one to wither. The bond holds so long as the blood agrees. He sat back, breathless. The blood had never been broken, only divided. 1 child to live, 1 to be taken. A quiet arrangement enforced by a presence that fed on balance. But what if that balance failed? Elijah rose and walked to the mirror. He stared at his reflection, searching for something, anything that marked him. His skin was pale, his eyes heavy, but there was no sign, nothing visible. Then a thought struck him. He had no twin, at least none that he knew of. He ran to Celeste's room, burst through the door without knocking. She sat at her desk, eyes closed, as if waiting for him. "Who was my twin?" he asked, his voice raw. She didn't flinch. "You didn't have one." He stepped closer. "That's not possible." "You were born alone," she said softly. "The first Dubois child in 2 centuries without a sibling. That's why I knew it would come for you sooner." "Why didn't it take me at birth?" "Because there was no balance," she said, "no choice, and the entity, whatever it is, it needs a choice. It needs the illusion of willingness." He stared at her, the truth sinking in like a slow knife. "So I've been delayed," she nodded. "But not spared. It waited, watched, until your soul was old enough to know fear, until you could feel the weight of what it demands." Elijah turned away, his heart pounding. He wasn't just part of the pattern, he was the exception. And in breaking the pattern, something had changed. Something worse had been awakened. The curse didn't want an offering. It wanted revenge. The silence between Elijah and Celeste grew louder than any storm. He paced her room, his mind spinning through every revelation, every whisper from the walls. Celeste watched him with the stillness of someone who had rehearsed grief for decades. Her eyes were not empty, they were burdened. "You knew I was born alone," Elijah said, "and you never told me that broke the pattern." Celeste nodded. "I didn't want to believe it would matter. I prayed that without a twin you might be free. But I'm not." "No," she said, voice barely audible. "You're not." Elijah turned sharply. "Then tell me everything, all of it." No riddles, no pauses. Celeste inhaled deeply, then gestured toward the armchair across from her. "Sit, Elijah. This truth is older than either of us." He obeyed, sinking into the chair as if bracing for impact. "When Matilda and I turned 18, the signs were clear," she began. She started sleepwalking, talking in other voices. Her eyes would cloud over, and she'd speak of things long buried. She was the first to hear the whispers since Marie. I knew then that the pattern hadn't ended. It had only waited. Elijah listened in silence as her voice trembled. "On the night of our birthday, I found her in the swamp, standing knee-deep in the water, her arms outstretched, eyes wide. She wasn't breathing, wasn't moving. The trees were deathly still." She looked down at her hands. "Then I heard it. A voice not hers. It said, 'One must live, one must open the door.'" "What did you do?" he asked. "I ran," she whispered. "I left her there. I ran back to the house and locked the doors. When the sun rose, she was gone, only her shoes remained, and the water had turned black." Elijah's chest tightened. "And you lived?" "Because you ran." "Yes," she said, finally meeting his eyes, "and I've lived with that guilt for 50 years. He sat back, stunned. "You've been trying to stop it all this time." "I tried to learn everything. The rituals, the origins, even the spirits that live in the swamp. I tracked the lineage, wrote it all down. But I could never find a way to sever it. Because I was a coward, Elijah. I survived, but I never faced it." He looked toward the window, the sun dipping low behind the trees. "And now it's my turn." Celeste stood, walked to a cabinet, and returned with a leather-bound notebook, aged, brittle, but intact. She placed it in his hands. "This is our family tree," she said. "Every birth, every death, every age. I marked each sacrifice. Look closely." He opened it. Dozens of names spanned the pages, Dubois after Dubois paired like echoes, circles drawn around the ones who lived, crosses through the ones who didn't. Each generation. One soul lost at 18. Every time. Except his. His name stood alone, no pair, no cross, no circle. "You broke the pattern," she said, "and that means the balance is off. Whatever Lucien bargained with, it doesn't want tradition anymore. It wants vengeance. It wants to reclaim everything it thinks was denied." Elijah's voice dropped. "So, what do I do?" Celeste stepped forward, placing her hands on his shoulders. "You do what I never could. You face it, head on, no running, no hiding, head on. If there's a way to undo this, it begins with you." He looked up at her, his throat dry. "I'm scared." "I know," she said, brushing a hand through his hair like she used to when he was a boy. "That's what makes you stronger than all of us. You don't carry this legacy because you chose it. You carry it because no one else would." A long silence followed. Then Elijah whispered, "Will you help me?" "I already am," she said. "But there's one thing you need to understand." "What?" "This curse feeds on silence. It survives because we kept our mouths shut, because we buried the truth. You must speak it, Elijah. You must name it, and you must decide if you'll let it take you, or if you'll be the one who ends it." He closed the notebook slowly. Outside, the wind stirred the cypress trees. A low hum carried through the shutters, a melody both distant and intimate. The lullaby had returned. Only this time, it was growing louder. The lullaby seeped through the house like a rising tide, soft, mournful, and impossible to ignore. Elijah followed its pull, each step dragging him closer to the forbidden doors of the east wing. They stood as they always had, locked, untouched, cloaked in dust. But now the air around them pulsed with something alive. He pressed his hand to the wood. It was warm. Behind it, the melody continued. Not whispered anymore, sung. He didn't hesitate. With a final breath, he drove his shoulder into the doors. Once, twice, until the frame cracked and the lock gave way with a brittle snap. The air that burst through was thick, stale and bitter, like breath trapped for generations. He stepped inside. The hallway was untouched by time. Everything was pristine, preserved as if waiting. Portraits of unfamiliar faces lined the walls. All Dubois, but none he'd ever seen. They watched him with painted eyes full of sorrow. At the end of the hall stood a single door, carved with strange runes and symbols identical to those in Lucien's journal. Elijah approached cautiously, his heart pounding like a drum in a funeral march. The handle turned with a soft click. The room was a bedroom, delicate, feminine, and untouched. A canopy bed draped in moth-eaten lace, a vanity, its mirror veiled in cloth, toys on a shelf. An open book on a side table. The air was freezing. He stepped forward, scanning the room. The lullaby had stopped. Silence fell like snowfall, soft yet suffocating. Then he saw her. In the corner, barely visible, a figure sat with her back turned. A young girl, hair black and tangled, wearing a white dress stained with age. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Elijah's voice cracked as he whispered, "Marie." The figure turned. Her face was half shadow, half ashen skin stretched tight over hollow eyes. Lips moved without sound. Her gaze met his, and something deep within him trembled, something ancestral, as if her sorrow had weight, and it had always been his to carry. She raised a hand and pointed to the vanity. He stepped forward. The mirror was still covered. Slowly he pulled the cloth away. At first he saw only his reflection, pale, shaken. Then her image joined his, but it didn't mimic. It moved on its own. Her mouth opened, and this time he heard the voice, not through his ears, but in his bones. "Return what was stolen." The mirror clouded, then shimmered with visions. He saw Lucien kneeling in a circle of salt and blood, chanting in a tongue not his own. Behind him, Marie writhed on the ground, her eyes rolled back, her mouth stretched in silent scream. He saw the pact being sealed, Lucien offering her essence, her soul, in exchange for longevity, fortune, protection. He saw her sealed away in this room, her spirit bound to the house as payment. The vision faded. Elijah stepped back, breath ragged. He sacrificed her. Marie nodded. But she didn't die. Not fully. He left her trapped. The ghost girl lowered her hand and began to fade. "No, wait," Elijah said. "How do I free you?" Her voice echoed once more, thinner now. "One must return what was stolen, with will, with blood, with truth." And then she vanished, leaving behind only the chill and the veil she once wore. Elijah staggered out of the room, down the hall, and into the open air of the main house. He collapsed in the parlor, heart thundering. Celeste rushed to his side. "What did you do?" "I saw her," he gasped. "Marie. Lucien didn't just offer blood. He offered her soul." Celeste's face drained of color. "He offered his own daughter. She's still here," he said, "trapped, watching, waiting." Celeste closed her eyes. Then the bond was never just about death. It was about silence, lies. "She wants it returned," Elijah said. "What was stolen?" Celeste gripped his arm. "Then you must be the one to do it. Because you're the first to see her and live." He nodded slowly, rising to his feet. The east wing no longer whispered. Now it waited. Elijah stood at the threshold of the east wing once more, heart still echoing with Marie's final words. Return what was stolen. It clung to him like a command, not a plea. He knew now. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about reparation. That night, the storm rolled in with unnatural speed. Lightning twisted across the sky like veins, and the wind howled through the trees with the voices of the long dead. The Dubois house shuddered beneath the weight of the coming storm, as if it too could feel the presence returning. Elijah sat alone in his room, the journal open to its final pages. Lucien's handwriting had deteriorated into near-mad scrawl, lines repeating themselves over and over. The door cannot be unmade, only traded. The soul remembers. Lagriffe waits. The name struck him like ice. He had seen it once before, scribbled in a margin, mistaken for metaphor. Lagriffe, the claw. The entity Lucien had bargained with wasn't a spirit or a demon in the human sense. It was something older, a consciousness that dwelled beyond form, beyond language, one that fed not on blood alone, but on intention, inheritance, and silence. Thunder cracked overhead. Elijah looked toward the mirror. At first it showed only him, pale, resolute. Then slowly, the reflection changed. The room behind him darkened. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, bending against the grain of the wood, and then it appeared. Lagriffe. Its form was not fixed, shifting, blurred, a humanoid silhouette cloaked in veil and horn, its hands too long, fingers tipped in talons. Where its face should have been was only darkness, deep, bottomless, and staring directly into Elijah's soul. It didn't speak, but Elijah understood it all the same. Your time has come. He gritted his teeth. I know who you are now. I know what you took. The mirror fogged with breath, though Elijah had exhaled nothing. She was given, as were the others. You tricked them, Elijah said. You twisted fear into ritual. The mirror pulsed. They came to me. You are born of their bargain. The reflection vanished, and Elijah fell backward, breath shallow. He scrambled to his desk and opened the letter from Eulalie, the one she'd written before his visit. He had never read it fully. Inside were sketches of symbols, ones that matched those etched in the east wing and on Marie's mirror. Protective sigils, binding marks, blood seals. Below them her note read, When the claw reveals itself, it has already begun to feed. You must not accept its offer. It will tempt you. It always does. Break the pact by choice, not in desperation. Willing blood is the key. The storm outside intensified. Trees bent like old men in prayer, and the house cried with groans from every floorboard. Elijah rose and moved to the window. In the distance by the tree line a figure stood. It was tall, motionless, cloaked in black with horns rising like antlers into the sky. Even from across the yard, Elijah felt its presence like static in his bones. The air grew heavy. His ears rang. Then he heard a whisper. Not from the house, not from the mirror, but from inside his head. Your blood can bind, or your blood can free. He turned from the window. Celeste stood in the doorway. Her face was pale, her hands trembled. It's here, isn't it? He nodded slowly. It showed itself. She stepped into the room. Did it offer you a way out? Not yet, he said, but I know it will. Then you must not listen, she said, voice firm. That's how it wins. It gives you what you want. But it takes what you need. Elijah opened Eulalie's note again and showed her the drawings. She said there's a way to bind it, a reversal, a ritual with symbols, blood, and truth. Celeste studied them in silence. It's dangerous. If done wrong, it strengthens the bond. If I do nothing, Elijah said, it takes me, or worse, it takes more. She reached out, touching his cheek. Then I'll help you. He shook his head. No, this is mine, my blood, my choice. Celeste looked at him, pride and sorrow dancing in her eyes. You are more Dubois than any of them. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the mirror. And there, just for an instant, Lagriffe smiled. Time no longer moved normally inside the Dubois house. The clocks ticked irregularly, their hands twitching, pausing, and then lunging forward with a sick urgency. Each tick seemed to echo louder than the last, as though the walls themselves were counting down to something final. Elijah stood before the grandfather clock in the main hall, staring at its face. The numbers had begun to bleed. A slow oozing red leaked from the edges of the glass, creeping downward like tears. He didn't wipe them away. He had 3 nights left. 3. Celeste found him standing there, unmoving. It's begun, she said. He nodded without looking at her. It won't stop now. She hesitated. You don't have to face it alone. Yes, he said, voice low. I do. That afternoon he gathered what Eulalie had told him to find. Chalk for the sigils, candles made from bone wax, an old knife that had belonged to Louisiana, its hilt still etched with the Dubois crest. He wrote the symbols from memory now. They lived in his mind like scars. As he drew the first circle on the floor of the attic, a wave of nausea hit him, not from fear but from recognition. His blood knew these marks, as if they had always been there. That night he returned to the mirror. It greeted him with silence at first, but he didn't flinch. I know your name now, he whispered. I know what you are. The surface rippled. Then Lagriffe appeared, not in full but as a shadow passing just behind the glass. You seek to unbind what was chosen. I seek to end it, Elijah replied. There is another way. He didn't respond. You do not have to die. The voice slithered through him, rich with temptation. I can give you more than they ever could. Power, purpose, a legacy beyond rot. He gripped the knife at his side. No. You would throw away your future for ghosts? I'm not throwing anything away, I'm choosing. The mirror splintered. For the first time, Lagriffe shrieked, not in pain but in rage. That night Celeste entered his room holding a small vial. My blood, she said. Take it. If it needs a Dubois sacrifice, maybe it can be me. Elijah stared at her, stricken. No, I won't lose you. You're all I have, she said, and you're all this family has left. If I can give you even one more day. He cut her off gently. You already have. She embraced him, fierce and trembling. Later, Elijah returned to the east wing and stood before Marie's door. The lullaby had stopped days ago. He feared what that meant. Had she faded? Had the entity silenced her for good? He opened the door anyway. The room was colder now, but she was there, barely visible, a figure made of mist and memory. He knelt. I'm going to finish this. For you, for all of them. The ghost didn't move, but her presence thickened, filling the space with a sorrow that no words could hold. Outside, the clocks began to chime. It was midnight. The blood clock was nearly spent. The following morning, Elijah made a decision. He walked into the fields behind the house and dug a shallow hole near the old pecan tree, the same place where Lucien had once buried family relics. There, Elijah placed the journal, the mirror's veil, and the dried flower he'd found in the box. He poured a circle of salt, lit 7 candles, and opened the knife. The air shuddered. I'm not afraid, he said. A wind rose, fierce and sudden, blowing out all but 1 candle. Behind him the trees bent forward, as if to listen. Then, for the first time, he saw the entity outside the mirror. Lagriffe emerged from the woods, cloaked in shadows, horned and crawling on limbs too long for this world. Its eyes were hollow, its face a blur, but its hunger, its need, was unmistakable. It circled him like a predator. Offer. Elijah raised the knife. I offer truth. He sliced a shallow line across his palm. Blood fell into the earth. The ground hissed. The creature stopped. Not enough. Elijah clenched his fist. Then take it all. The flames of the candles surged. The air cracked with heat. Lagriffe shrieked again, furious, wounded, but Elijah didn't move. Because for the first time in generations, someone had stood their ground, and the blood clock paused. The following morning, the house held its breath. No creaking floorboards, no moaning timbers, just stillness. Even the wind had stopped, leaving the air unnaturally calm. Elijah moved through the silence with purpose. There was no more doubt, only action. He returned to the attic and retrieved the journal one last time. The page he'd overlooked before, the one nearly torn from the binding, contained a crude sketch. A mirror, unlike any other. Not decorative, not for reflection. It was circular, rimmed in black glass and embedded with symbols that pulsed with something more than history. He remembered where he'd seen it. The cellar. A room he had only been in once as a child, too afraid to go deeper than the first few steps. Now he descended, The cellar smelled of mildew and rot, a dense smell that clung to memory more than flesh. At the far end, covered in canvas and dust, was the mirror. Exactly as in Lucien's sketch, it sat upright against the stone wall, untouched by decay, untouched by time. But as Elijah approached, the glass rippled like water. He knelt and brushed the canvas aside. Symbols encircled the frame, identical to those Eulalie had drawn. Protective sigils, but corrupted, inverted. This was no tool of defense. It was a gate. The moment his fingers brushed the glass, the surface turned pitch black. Cold raced through his veins. Behind him, the cellar door slammed shut. A voice surged inside him, not Legriff's, not Marie's, but Lucien's, clear, frantic. I tried to stop it, but the mirror binds us, it listens, it feeds on choice. Elijah stood firm. I choose to end it. The mirror brightened, the symbols around its edge glowing faintly red. The blood he'd spilled days before reacted, burning through his veins with renewed purpose. Suddenly, Legriff's voice returned deeper than before, layered in echo. You bring no offering, no balance, no soul but your own. I offer truth, Elijah said, and I bring the soul you bound long ago. The air twisted. A howl rose from the floor itself. The mirror trembled. From the darkness inside the glass, a form emerged. Marie. No longer a pale shadow, but brilliant, radiant and sorrowful. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Legriff screamed, a sound that shattered Elijah's thoughts, bending the walls of the cellar. You cannot return what was freely given. Elijah stepped closer to the mirror. She was never yours. Marie raised her hand and Elijah mirrored the motion. Their palms touched the surface of the glass, one from each side. The runes ignited. The mirror cracked. The cellar floor shook, and from the earth beneath, roots erupted, black, coiling, desperate to seize something, anything. The entity shrieked again, a sound of pure loss. Celeste burst into the cellar, eyes wild. It's here. Elijah didn't turn. I know. Legriff spoke again, voice thinner now but still laced with venom. You offer nothing. You bleed only for pride. You cannot bind me alone. And then Celeste stepped forward. She took Elijah's other hand, her voice calm. Then take me. He turned to her in shock. No. Yes, she said. It must end with both of us. With blood that remembers and blood that forgives. Together they pressed their hands to the glass. The mirror erupted in light. The entity wailed, pulled backward through the cracks and into the abyss beyond the frame. Its claws scraped the glass, but it could not hold. Its name, its shape, its power, sucked back into the void from which it had emerged generations ago. And then, silence. The glass shattered completely. The runes faded. The cellar went dark. When Elijah awoke, he was lying on the dirt floor, surrounded by broken shards. Marie was gone. The mirror was no more. The sigils were extinguished. Beside him, Celeste breathed, shallow but steady. He rose slowly, blood on his hands but not afraid. The pact had been broken, not with hatred, not with vengeance, but with truth. And blood, willingly given. The sky turned crimson. It wasn't gradual. It bled into color like a wound reopening, sudden and raw. The moon, swollen, unnatural, hovered above the treetops like an unblinking eye. Every creature in the swamp fell silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elijah stood beneath it, the grass cold beneath his feet. The ritual had begun. He walked alone, carrying the blood-stained knife and a pouch of salt tied to his belt. In his pocket, the final page of Eulalie's instructions. The place had been described in riddles, but he found it without effort. The swamp opened to a clearing untouched by time, its trees skeletal, roots spiraling outward like grasping fingers. In the center, a circle of stones, half sunken in mud. Symbols etched in their surfaces, identical to the ones carved into the mirror, into Marie's room, into Lucien's journal. This was where it started, where Lucien had made the pact, and now where Elijah would end it. He knelt in the circle and drew the final sigils. Each stroke burned his skin, though the chalk never touched it. He lit the bone candles, placed one at each cardinal point. Their flames flickered but never faded, even as wind swirled violently around him. In the center he poured a thin line of salt, then another, and then one more, crossing them all to form an unbroken barrier. He stepped inside and waited. At first, there was only the howl of wind and the distant cry of frogs. Then came the rustle, not leaves, not branches, but fabric. Something moving without weight, something watching. He stood clutching the knife as the clearing darkened unnaturally. From the shadows emerged forms, not one, not two, but many. His ancestors, ghosts, transparent but vivid, men and women from portraits, from journals, from family whispers. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths silent, yet Elijah heard them clearly. How you carry what we gave, you break what we bound. You dare rewrite the cost. Their voices layered like smoke. He stepped forward, unflinching. I do. They circled him, murmuring, their movements like memories caught in wind. Then one figure broke from the rest. A tall man, silver-haired, cane in hand, Lucien. You wear the blood well, Lucien said, voice smooth as silk. But you misunderstand. I understand perfectly, Elijah answered. You traded lives for legacy. I gave us a future. You bought time with death, Lucien smiled. So will you. No, Elijah said. I'll pay it, but I won't continue it. Lucien raised his cane. The ground cracked beneath Elijah's feet. You cannot undo the roots. I don't need to, Elijah said. I only need to stop the bloom. The wind howled louder. The other spirits vanished into the trees. Only Lucien remained. He stepped back into the shadows, and Lagriffe emerged, no longer veiled, no longer restrained by glass. Its form towered above Elijah, horned, skeletal, black as the space between stars. Its mouth stretched too wide, its eyes empty. It stepped into the circle. But the salt held. It paused. You summon me, then bar me. Elijah met its gaze. I offer what you were promised, willingly. He raised the knife to his chest, but before he could act, a second voice cut through the trees. No. Celeste stepped into the clearing. Elijah turned, panic in his chest. You shouldn't be here. I should, she said, calm. Because you are not alone. She stepped into the circle beside him, ignoring Lagriffe's hiss. You would share his fate? The entity asked. I would offer my own. Elijah shook his head. This is my choice. I know, she said, but you are not the only one left to choose. Lagriffe snarled. The circle glowed red. The entity opened its claws. One soul. One seal. Elijah and Celeste stood side by side. The knife passed between their hands. The blood moon reached its apex, and the circle burned brighter than flame. The circle blazed like a wound in the earth, red light pulsing in rhythm with Elijah's heartbeat. Lagriffe towered before him, its form flickering like a flame too large to hold shape. Shadows coiled around its limbs, and its claws scraped against the salt barrier, hissing at every touch. Elijah held the knife, its blade trembling in his hand. Beside him, Celeste stood tall, her face pale but unafraid. Their bloodline, centuries of silence, sacrifice, and survival, had led to this single irreversible moment. Lagriffe's voice cracked like thunder through their bones. One soul. One seal, the pact must be paid. Celeste reached for the knife. No, Elijah said, his voice shaking. I summoned it. I'll finish it. She placed her hand gently over his. Then let me give it reason to accept. Before he could stop her, she drew the blade across her palm, her blood falling into the circle. It sizzled on the salt and the wind around them roared. Elijah stared at her, stricken. Why? Because I ran once, she said, tears in her eyes, and someone else died for it. I won't let that happen again. Lagriffe stepped closer, the edge of its veil brushing the barrier. The blood accepted, the offering acknowledged. But something shifted. The circle did not close, the flames did not consume, instead the salt darkened, as though resisting. The entity paused, its voice quieter now. "This blood carries sorrow, not surrender." Celeste stumbled and Elijah caught her. "It's not enough." "No," she whispered. "It has to be you, all of it." He helped her to her knees and turned to face the creature once more. "No more running," he said. "No more blood taken in fear." He raised the knife and sliced across his chest, deep, deliberate, unflinching. The blood fell freely. The circle responded. Every rune ignited in pure white light, burning through the red. Lagriffe screamed, not in triumph, in pain. Its form began to collapse inward, folding like smoke caught in reverse wind. Its claws dug into the air, trying to hold on to the mortal plane. But the offering had been made willingly, with knowledge, with truth. The old rules no longer applied. Elijah shouted over the roar, "By my blood, I return what was stolen." From the trees, the spirits emerged again, Louisiana among them. They watched as Marie stepped forward, radiant and whole. She placed her hand over Elijah's bleeding chest, and the storm stopped. The flames died. Lagriffe vanished in an instant, torn backward through an unseen veil, its howl fading into nothingness. The circle collapsed, the runes turning to ash. The moon above faded to silver, and the night returned to stillness. Elijah collapsed to his knees, blood soaking his shirt, his breath shallow. Celeste crawled to his side, cradling him. "Did we do it?" he asked, eyes barely open. She smiled through her tears. "Yes." Marie stood before them, her face peaceful for the first time. She mouthed something, "Thank you," before fading into the morning mist. The clearing was empty once more, the roots receded, the stones cracked and crumbled, the ground was clean. Elijah closed his eyes, the weight of generations lifting from his chest. He had severed the chain. The Dubois line was free. Morning arrived without fanfare. No birds sang. No breeze stirred the trees. The swamp, once a restless whisper of secrets, stood utterly still. But the silence was no longer threatening. It was clean. It was peace. Elijah awoke in his bed, though he had no memory of returning. The wounds on his chest had been cleaned and wrapped. The room was bathed in soft, golden light. For the first time in years, no shadows lingered in the corners. The air was clear. Light reached places that had remained untouched for decades. He sat up slowly, his body heavy but whole. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Not the kind of silence that crept or loomed, but the kind that rested after a long, terrible storm. Celeste was in the parlor, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes distant. She turned when he entered, and for a moment they simply looked at one another. No words. Just the quiet understanding of two people who had seen something few ever survived. She rose and embraced him. "It's over," she whispered. He nodded. "I know." They sat by the fireplace, the same one where Elijah had once read Lucian's journal by flickering light. Now the flames danced warmly, without fear, without watching eyes. "I saw her," Elijah said quietly. "Marie. She thanked us." Celeste smiled faintly. She was the first, and the last. Elijah leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling. "What happens now?" "We live," she said. "For the first time, we live." They didn't speak of Lagriffe, of the pact, of Lucien. The names still held weight, but not power. The curse had ended, but the memories remained. They always would. Later that day, Elijah walked the grounds alone. The trees no longer whispered. The swamp water was clearer than he had ever seen. Frogs sang. Birds returned to the branches, and the house, long thought doomed, stood tall, no longer leaning as though under invisible pressure. He paused at the edge of the pecan grove where the ritual had taken place. The circle was gone. The stones had crumbled. Only a faint outline remained in the grass, soon to be erased by time and sun. At the base of one tree, something shimmered. He knelt and brushed away the dirt to reveal a silver locket. He opened it carefully. Inside was a miniature portrait of two girls, twins, Celeste and Matilda, their faces frozen in youth, unmarked by what was to come. He held it tightly, then placed it gently in his pocket. Back inside, he returned to the study. The journal still sat on the desk, its pages yellowed and worn. Elijah picked it up, thumbed through the entries. He didn't need to read them again, he knew them by heart. He found a blank page and began to write. The Dubois bloodline has ended, not by death, but by choice. What began in fear was undone by truth. This house no longer belongs to ghosts, it belongs to the living. He signed his name at the bottom, then closed the book for good. That night he sat on the porch with Celeste. They watched the fireflies drift lazily across the lawn. In the distance the cypress trees swayed, not in mourning but in rhythm with the breeze. "I want to open this place," Elijah said, "not as a home, as a refuge." Celeste tilted her head. "For who?" "For those who need somewhere quiet, safe," he said. "Where they can heal without ghosts looking over their shoulder." She nodded, her voice soft. "Then maybe the Dubois name will mean something good after all." They sat in silence as the stars blinked into the sky. And for the first time, Elijah felt no weight on his shoulders, only freedom. The days that followed passed gently, like water smoothing stone. The Dubois estate, once a place of dread, slowly transformed into a haven. Elijah worked from dawn to dusk, scrubbing mold from the walls, opening shutters long sealed, and clearing vines that had strangled windows shut for decades. With each repair, the house breathed easier. It was no longer a crypt, it was becoming a home. He didn't do it alone. Word traveled quickly in the nearby parishes. Stories of the cursed plantation had spread for years, but now whispers turned hopeful. People came, quiet, wounded souls who had lost homes, families, or simply direction. Elijah didn't ask for their pasts. He gave them keys, beds, food, and the kind of silence that heals. Children arrived first, some orphaned, others abandoned. He converted the West Wing into dormitories, painted the walls soft colors, filled shelves with books, and turned Marie's room into a reading nook. Not to erase her, but to remember her properly. The haunting was gone, but the memory lived on. Celeste, though aging faster now, kept her strength. She became a mother to the lost ones, stitching their clothes, teaching them to cook, telling stories in the parlor that ended in laughter, not screams. One morning, Elijah walked the garden path he had restored behind the house. It was lined with lilies now, their petals white as bone but vibrant with life. He knelt and placed a small stone near the base of a tree. On it was a single name, Matilda. Next to it, another, Marie. Not graves, memorials. He sat beneath the tree, holding Eulalie's final letter. She had sent it by courier, wrapped in red cloth, addressed only to Child of the Broken Chain. "The spirits are still," she wrote. "The swamp sings again. You have not destroyed darkness, only reminded it cannot always win. Remember this. Evil sleeps when it is starved, but it never dies." Elijah folded the letter and placed it in a tin box with others, tokens of what had been, warnings for what might one day return. Back in the house, one of the boys ran up to him, holding a drawing. Crayon lines formed a rough image of a house surrounded by smiling faces. "Is this us?" Elijah asked, kneeling beside him. The boy nodded. "You're in the window, that's your book," Elijah smiled. "Think you could draw a few more?" "I'm going to draw everybody," the boy said proudly, then ran off. That evening, Elijah added a brass plaque to the front gate. It read, "Maison libre, for those who carry unseen scars." He lit a lantern beside it, then turned to see Celeste watching from the porch, wrapped in a shawl too big for her frame. "You made it a sanctuary," she said. "No," Elijah replied. "We did." She smiled faintly. "Lucien would never have imagined this." "Good," he said. "Let his name fade. Let theirs grow." She looked to the sky. "Do you ever worry it'll come back?" Elijah paused. "I do, but I don't live by that fear anymore. If it returns, it won't find us helpless." They sat side by side, the stars above unmarred by clouds. The moon, full but pale, cast soft light over the fields. Behind them the house glowed with lanterns and laughter, and in the distance the swamp was quiet, not asleep, but resting. For now peace had been earned. Years passed, the seasons softened the memories, and Maison Libre flourished. Children grew and left, carrying with them not curses, but hope. Elijah's hair turned silver, and lines formed at the corners of his eyes, but there was no fear in his face, only calm and the quiet pride of someone who had learned the cost of survival. He filled journals with stories, not of hauntings or horror, but of new beginnings. Every year on the date that had once marked the cycle of loss, he planted a tree beside the old pecan grove. The land healed with him, the air grew lighter. Celeste's health faded gently. She spent her last days in the sunlight, surrounded by laughter, passing in her sleep with the locket of her twin in her hands. Elijah buried her beneath the lilies, next to her sister and Marie, under stones that bore only their names, never the curse. He married a local schoolteacher, and together they raised 3 children, none of them bearing the mark, none haunted by the old shadows. Maison Libre became known across the parish as a place of safety and second chances. Travelers arrived on foot by boat, sometimes with nothing but their names. Elijah welcomed them all, never asking for stories they weren't ready to tell. As he grew older, Elijah entrusted the care of Maison Libre to his eldest daughter, Lucille. She carried his gentle wisdom, but none of his burdens. The mirrors in the house reflected only the living. No more voices echoed in the halls, no footsteps paused at midnight. Yet on quiet evenings, as the sun slipped behind the cypress trees, Elijah sometimes walked the grounds alone. He spoke to the air, honoring the names and memories that built the foundation beneath his feet. He never forgot the lesson Marie and Celeste had given him. The past was a shadow, but it could not shape the light unless invited. One autumn evening, Elijah sat by the window with his youngest son, Gabriel, watching fireflies drift beyond the garden. The boy looked up wide-eyed and asked, "Are the stories true, Papa? About the old days? About the curse?" Elijah smiled, drawing him close. "They're true in their way, but our story is bigger. It's about choosing courage even when it seems hopeless, about breaking the cycle and building something new." Gabriel nodded, satisfied, and soon drifted off to sleep. But as the night deepened and the world slipped into that hush between heartbeats, Elijah caught a flicker at the edge of the woods. A figure, tall, horned, indistinct, watched from among the cypress trees, just for a moment, then gone. A chill crept through Elijah's bones, old and familiar. He stood at the window, steady. "If you come back," he whispered into the darkness, "you'll find nothing left to feed on here." The house remained still. The swamp beyond lay peaceful, its secrets resting beneath moonlit water. Elijah closed his journal for the final time, placing it on the shelf alongside the others. His story was finished, not with dread, but with gratitude. So, if the Dubois bloodline has chilled you, if you felt the weight and the release of these haunted years, remember to subscribe for more stories from the shadowed corners of history. The world is full of curses waiting to be unmasked, and every family carries its own legend. And don't let the story end here. Click on the video suggested on your screen to discover another tale where the past refuses to sleep and courage means everything. Because, as you've just learned, the only way to escape the darkness is to face it and tell the story until it no longer holds power. Thank you for joining the Dubois journey. Until the next story, may your home remain light, your bloodline free, and your nights peaceful.